Welcome to our countdown of the most shocking scandals and hidden crimes of classic Hollywood's most celebrated directors. Behind the glamour and artistic achievements of cinema's golden age lies a troubling history of misconduct, abuse of power, and studios working overtime to protect their valuable assets. These are the stories that Hollywood tried to keep hidden. Number 10. Substance budgets in production. One of the film industry's open secrets during the heyday of classic cinema was the presence of unofficial substance budgets worked into production costs. Legendary directors would often request additional funds classified as hospitality or talent comfort that were actually allocated for providing stimulants to keep cast and crew working through grueling shoot schedules. In those days, it wasn't even considered problematic, recalls a veteran production assistant who worked with several major directors in the 1950s. It was simply part of making movies. Directors would request these special budget items, and studio heads would approve them without questioning. Directors like Otto Preminger and Michael Curtiz were rumored to have standing arrangements with studios to provide whatever substances were needed to keep productions on schedule. These stimulants were particularly common during night shoots or when filming fell behind schedule. The pressure to deliver films on time and under budget was immense. Film historian Margaret Reynolds explains. Directors would go to extraordinary lengths to ensure productivity, even if it meant distributing controlled substances to exhausted actors and crew members. What would result in serious legal consequences today was treated as standard operating procedure then. Studios protected their directors, actors developed dependencies, and the cycle continued film after film. This practice contributed to the dependency issues that plagued many Golden Age stars, and continued well into the 1970s and 80s, when directors like Hal Ashby and others reportedly maintained similar unofficial budgets. Number 9. Victor Fleming's treatment of child actors. Victor Fleming, the celebrated director of classics like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, had a notorious reputation for harsh treatment of actors, particularly child performers. His methods would be considered abusive by today's standards, but were protected by MGM's powerful publicity department. During the filming of The Wizard of Oz, Fleming's treatment of 16-year-old Judy Garland was particularly troubling. According to multiple accounts from cast and crew members, Fleming would regularly berate the young actress, sometimes reducing her to tears between takes. In one infamous incident, when Garland couldn't stop giggling during a scene, Fleming allegedly took her aside and slapped her face before instructing her to continue the scene. Fleming believed in what he called shock direction, explains film historian Richard Matheson. He thought that genuine emotional responses could be triggered through intimidation and fear. MGM executives knew about these techniques, but valued his ability to finish films on schedule and under budget. Child actors on his sets were often pushed to physical exhaustion, with Fleming demanding take after take until they delivered exactly what he wanted. Margaret O'Brien, who worked with Fleming as a child, later recalled, "There was always this underlying threat that if you didn't perform perfectly, there were dozens of other children who could replace you." Directors like Fleming used that fear constantly. MGM's publicity department worked overtime to maintain Fleming's image as a brilliant, if demanding, director. Any complaints from parents or guardians were quickly silenced with contract renegotiations or threats of blacklisting. The studio system's absolute control over actors' careers meant that few dared to speak out against a powerful director like Fleming. Number 8. Alfred Hitchcock's obsession with Tippi Hedren. Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense, harbored darker personal obsessions that manifested in his treatment of actresses, most notoriously Tippi Hedren, during the filming of The Birds and Marnie. What began as a professional relationship quickly transformed into something far more troubling once Hedren was under contract. He was possessive and controlling in ways that went far beyond a director-actress relationship, recalls a production assistant who worked on both films. He would dictate what she could wear off set, who she could socialize with, and monitored her movements throughout the day. During the filming of The Birds, Hitchcock subjected Hedren to 5 days of having live birds thrown at her for the film's attic scene, despite promises that mechanical birds would be used. She suffered cuts, exhaustion, and psychological trauma as real birds were repeatedly hurled at her face, take after take. What happened in that attic scene was not filmmaking. It was punishment, says film historian Barbara Hollins. Hitchcock had become obsessed with her, and when she rebuffed his advances, he used his power as a director to make her suffer. When Hedren finally stood up to Hitchcock during Marnie, refusing his inappropriate behavior, he reportedly told her he would ruin her career. Using his considerable influence, Hitchcock kept her under contract for 2 more years without allowing her to work, effectively stalling her promising career. The studio knew exactly what was happening, says Hedren's biographer Donald Spotto. But Hitchcock was one of their most valuable directors. Protecting him was simply good business, regardless of what happened to a young actress. For decades, Hitchcock's genius overshadowed these stories until Hedren finally shared her full experience in her 2016 memoir, forcing a re-evaluation of the celebrated director's legacy. Number 7. Nuclear contamination on The Conqueror. In 1956, director Dick Powell brought a cast and crew of over 220 people to the Utah desert to film The Conqueror, starring John Wayne as Genghis Khan. What Powell and the production team at RKO Pictures knew, but didn't share with the cast, was that they were filming just 137 miles downwind from the Nevada National Security Site, where extensive nuclear testing had been conducted. The location was literally contaminated with radioactive fallout, explains environmental scientist Dr. Robert Pendleton. The desert sands contained particles from multiple nuclear detonations, and the production spent months stirring up that dust with horses, vehicles, and equipment. The consequences were devastating. Within 25 years of the film's completion, 91 cast and crew members developed cancer, and 46 died from the disease, including stars John Wayne, Susan Hayward, Agnes Moorehead, and the director himself, Dick Powell. The government had assured RKO that the area was safe, notes film historian Martin Collins. But internal documents later revealed that officials were well aware of the contamination levels. The studio executives and Powell made a calculated decision to proceed anyway, prioritizing the film's distinctive visual landscape over safety concerns. Particularly disturbing was how the production enhanced the contamination exposure. To make the landscape look more authentic, tons of dirt from the filming location were transported back to Hollywood sound stages for interior scenes, effectively bringing the radioactive soil directly to the actors and crew. It amounts to one of the most egregious examples of negligence in film history, says radiation safety expert Dr. Ellen Hughes. The decision to film there, knowing the risks, and then to hide those risks from the cast and crew, is unconscionable. The tragedy of The Conqueror stands as a stark reminder of how Hollywood's quest for authenticity and profit sometimes came at an incalculable human cost. Number 6. The Patricia Douglas assault case. In 1937, MGM Studios organized what they called a sales convention at a remote ranch outside Hollywood. The studio recruited 120 young women, including 20-year-old dancer Patricia Douglas, telling them they were being hired as extras for a musical sequence. What these women didn't know was that they were actually being brought in as entertainment for hundreds of intoxicated salesmen, explains film historian Eleanor Grant. It was essentially trafficking disguised as a film production. At this event, Douglas was assaulted by an MGM salesman named David Ross. When she took the unprecedented step of filing charges and speaking publicly about what happened, MGM deployed its formidable resources to destroy her credibility and protect the studio's reputation. The studio's response was immediate and ruthless, says legal historian James Harmon. They bribed witnesses, planted negative stories about Douglas in the press, and used their connections with local law enforcement to obstruct the investigation. Louis B. Mayer, MGM's powerful head, personally oversaw the campaign to discredit Douglas. The studio hired private investigators to dig into her past, pressured her friends to turn against her, and even had doctors falsify medical reports. The message was clear, notes women's historian Dr. Rachel Klein. If you spoke out against the studio, they would use every resource to crush you. Douglas was essentially erased from Hollywood. The case was eventually dismissed, with MGM's influence proving too powerful for a young dancer to overcome. Douglas retreated from public life, traumatized not only by the assault, but by the systematic campaign against her. Her story remained largely unknown until decades later when filmmaker David Sten uncovered it while researching studio history. What happened to Patricia Douglas reveals the extraordinary lengths studios would go to protect their image, says Sten. It wasn't just about covering up one incident. It was about ensuring no one else would ever dare to come forward. Number 5. Danger on the set of Noahs Ark. Long before CGI could create realistic disasters, director Michael Curtis decided to film the flood sequence for his 1928 biblical epic, Noahs Ark, with catastrophic realism. What followed was one of Hollywood's most dangerous film shoots, resulting in injuries, near drownings, and allegations of multiple fatalities. Curtis ordered the release of 600,000 gallons of water onto a set filled with hundreds of extras, explains film safety expert William Dexter. Many of these performers couldn't swim, weren't warned about the deluge, and had no safety equipment or escape routes. The director, known for his relentless pursuit of realism, ignored warnings from safety advisors and his own crew about the dangers of the planned sequence. When the massive water tanks were opened, chaos ensued as extras were swept away by the powerful currents, struggling to keep their heads above water while weighed down by heavy costumes. The screams you hear in that scene aren't acting, notes film historian Elaine Summers. Those were people genuinely fighting for their lives while Curtis continued filming, reportedly shouting, "That's perfect! Keep the cameras rolling." While studio records acknowledge only 3 injuries, crew members later reported pulling unconscious extras from the water and administering emergency aid. Persistent rumors suggest that at least 3 people lost their lives, though Warner Brothers vigorously denied these claims and allegedly paid off witnesses to maintain silence. The studio went into immediate damage control, says Hollywood legal expert Thomas Reed. Records were altered, medical reports disappeared, and employees were reminded of their confidentiality agreements. It was a masterclass in corporate cover-up. Despite the controversy, Curtis faced no serious consequences. He went on to direct classics like Casablanca and Mildred Pierce, his reputation as a brilliant filmmaker overshadowing the human cost of his methods. The incident did, however, eventually contribute to the establishment of safety regulations for Hollywood productions, though these would prove woefully inadequate for decades to come. Number 4. Charlie Chaplin's underage relationships. Charlie Chaplin's genius as a filmmaker and performer long overshadowed the troubling pattern of his personal relationships with extremely young women. The beloved creator of The Little Tramp consistently pursued teenage girls, often beginning relationships with them when they were as young as 15 or 16 years old. Chaplin had a specific type, explains celebrity biographer Richard Bennett. He was attracted to very young, naive women whom he could mold and control. He would cast them in small roles, become their mentor, and then the relationship would quickly turn romantic despite significant age differences. His marriage to 16-year-old Mildred Harris when he was 29 was just the beginning. He later married 16-year-old Lita Gray when he was 35, after she became pregnant with his child at age 15. Years later, he began his relationship with Paulette Goddard when she was allegedly 17, though accounts of her age vary, and he was 43. The studios were complicit in covering up these relationships, notes film historian Margaret Wilson. They would create false biographies for these young women, adding years to their ages in publicity materials. Birth certificates would mysteriously get lost or be altered. The most public scandal erupted with Joan Barry, a young, aspiring actress who filed a paternity suit against Chaplin. The resulting court case and publicity damaged his public image significantly, with allegations about his preference for extremely young companions becoming more widely known. What's particularly disturbing is how the industry normalized this behavior, says cultural historian Dr. James Peterson. Chaplin wasn't unique. Many powerful men in Hollywood pursued underage girls. The difference was that his fame made his pattern more visible. The scandal eventually contributed to Chaplin being denied re-entry to the United States in 1952, when he left to promote a film. The Justice Department revoked his re-entry permit, citing moral turpitude. Among the reasons, forcing Chaplin to spend the remainder of his life in exile in Switzerland. Number 3. Judy Garland's studio mistreatment. The tragic story of Judy Garland represents one of Hollywood's most shameful legacies. From the moment MGM signed her at age 13, the studio system began a systematic campaign of control, manipulation, and exploitation that would haunt her for the rest of her life. MGM didn't see Judy as a child. They saw her as an asset to be maximized, explains Garland biographer Gerald Clark. Studio head Louis B. Mayer and his executives controlled every aspect of her existence, from her appearance to her personal relationships. The studio's abuse began with constant criticism of Garland's appearance. Executives regularly called her fat and ugly, putting her on strict diets and binding her developing figure to maintain a childlike appearance. To keep up with punishing work schedules, the studio provided her with stimulants to stay awake during the day and sleeping pills at night, beginning a cycle of dependency that would plague her throughout her life. By the time she was 18, she was already dependent on the pills the studio gave her, notes addiction specialist Dr. Robert Carson. MGM created this dependency deliberately to make her more compliant and productive. They weren't concerned with her well-being, only with how many films she could make them. When Garland began showing interest in romantic relationships, the studio intervened, dictating who she could date. MGM even forced her to terminate pregnancies when they interfered with filming schedules, prioritizing production timetables over her physical and emotional health. The level of control was absolute, says film historian Patricia Werner. When Judy showed any resistance or independent thought, the studio would threaten to replace her or remind her of how lucky she was to have been chosen at all. By the time MGM released her from her contract at age 28, the damage was done. Garland's physical and mental health had been systematically destroyed by the very studio that had made her a star, leaving her to struggle with the consequences for the remaining 22 years of her life. Number 2. King Vidor and the Thomas Ins mystery. The mysterious death of producer Thomas Ince in 1924 remains one of Hollywood's most enduring unsolved cases, with director King Vidor allegedly uncovering and then concealing explosive information about what really happened aboard William Randolph Hearst's yacht. Thomas Ince officially died of heart failure after becoming ill on Hearst's yacht during a birthday celebration, explains film historian Edward Blake. But from the beginning, rumors swirled that something far more sinister had occurred. The most persistent theory suggests that Hearst had actually intended to shoot Charlie Chaplin, who was rumored to be having an affair with Hearst's mistress, Marion Davies. In the confusion of a confrontation, Ince was allegedly shot instead. What makes this case particularly intriguing is King Vidor's connection to it decades later. Vidor became obsessed with the Ince case in the 1960s, says investigative journalist Melissa Roberts. He conducted extensive interviews and research, claiming he had discovered the truth. He even planned to make a film about it called The Lover's Murder, but mysteriously abandoned the project. Witnesses from the original yacht party reported that Hearst's power and influence transformed the investigation. Police were kept from boarding the yacht, the body was cremated with unusual haste, and Hearst's newspapers, which normally covered Hollywood scandals extensively, barely mentioned Ins's death. What's particularly suspicious is how Vidor, after claiming to have solved the mystery, suddenly dropped the entire project, notes film industry insider James Lawson. The rumor is that someone, possibly representing Hearst's still powerful estate, made it clear that pursuing the film would have severe consequences for Vidor's career. Vidor reportedly told confidants he had evidence implicating not just Hearst, but other powerful Hollywood figures who helped cover up what really happened. Whatever truth he uncovered, he took it to his grave, leaving the Ins case as one of Hollywood's most tantalizing unsolved mysteries. Number 1. The Twilight Zone tragedy. The most devastating accident in Hollywood directing history occurred on July 23, 1982, when director John Landis's segment of Twilight Zone the movie turned deadly. The incident resulted in the deaths of actor Vic Morrow and 2 child performers, Micah Din Lei, aged 7, and Renee Shin-Yi Chen, aged 6, in a helicopter crash during filming. What made this tragedy particularly egregious were the multiple safety protocols that were ignored, explains film safety expert Robert Thompson. Landis and his team cut corners that directly led to these deaths, and then the Hollywood machine activated to protect one of its own. The scene being filmed depicted Morrow's character rescuing 2 Vietnamese children from a village under attack during the Vietnam War. Landis insisted on using real helicopters flying at dangerously low altitudes, combined with explosive pyrotechnics and limited safety measures. The children were working illegally, after hours, without permits, notes entertainment lawyer Susan Richards. Their parents weren't informed about the helicopters or explosives. California child labor laws were blatantly violated, yet somehow production continued. When the accident occurred, the helicopter pilot was blinded by pyrotechnic explosions and lost control of the aircraft, which crashed directly onto Morrow and the 2 children. What followed was a 5-year legal battle that resulted in the unprecedented criminal prosecution of Landis and 4 other filmmakers for involuntary manslaughter. The trial exposed the film industry's cavalier attitude toward safety, says legal analyst Michael Peterson. Witnesses testified that Landis had been warned repeatedly about the dangers but dismissed these concerns, allegedly saying, "I'm in charge here," moments before the fatal crash. Despite overwhelming evidence of negligence, the jury ultimately acquitted Landis and his co-defendants. The director's career barely suffered. He went on to direct Coming to America and other major films. While the tragedy did lead to improved safety regulations in Hollywood, the fact that no one was held accountable for 3 preventable deaths remains one of the industry's most shameful legacies. The ability of a powerful director to escape consequences for such negligence revealed how deeply corrupted the system was, concludes industry watchdog Catherine Ellis. Even with multiple fatalities captured on film, Hollywood's protective mechanisms ensured that the show would go on. Which of these shocking Hollywood director scandals surprised you the most? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. The golden age of cinema might have produced timeless classics, but as we've seen, the stories behind the camera were often darker than anything that made it to the screen. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Hollywood's hidden history, please hit that like button and share this video with fellow film buffs who appreciate knowing the full story behind their favorite classics. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more revealing content about the entertainment industry's most closely guarded secrets. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads, and let us know in the comments which Hollywood mysteries you'd like us to investigate next.